There we go. If we can just ask people not presenting.
Great. Still admit people at the same time. So yeah, so yeah, we're recording today's session and we'll make this public afterwards as well. Yes, so if those people who are participants and are not speaking today, it would be great if you have your camera and microphone off for the time being until you might want to ask a question later on following the talks. So yes, welcome. Grand Union, for those who may not already be aware, is a gallery and artist studios based in Digbeth in Birmingham. Part of our programme is about bringing people together, whether that be around art, gardening, culture, food. All these things are really important to us. And we've got the pleasure today to bring together various people involved in gardening and arts around Birmingham, but also further afield as well. And I'll briefly introduce those people. We have Michelle Peterkin-Walker, who is a socially engaged artist, activist and videographer based in Liverpool. Jenni, who's the new CEO of Martineau Gardens, a community garden and charity in Birmingham city centre, maintained through a therapeutic horticultural programme. We have Adereti, who's curatorial fellow at Grand Union, and they are currently programming weekly workshops with artists and creative practitioners to foster a connection between plants and people at our Minerva Garden, which you'll find out more about later on. And then we have Rowe from General Public, which is a collaborative platform of artists, Chris Pullman and Liz. They devise large-scale projects that incorporate elements of fiction, myth-making, local history, reinvention, and heritage rebooting. And then we have Jacob Williams, who is a community engagement officer for the Wildlife Trust across Birmingham and the Black Country, as well as a long-standing volunteer for the Digbeth Community Garden. So each speaker will talk for about 5 minutes, introducing their garden and the way in which they work with people in turn. And then following that, we'll have space for conversation and questions, which will be led and chaired by Michelle. So if you have any questions at all during the session, please pop them in the chat and we'll try and work our way through those at the end of the talk. I'll pass on to Joe to give a bit more context about kind of art and ecology talk series.
Yeah, so really welcome everybody, and thanks so much for spending some time on a rainy afternoon to come and sort of hear about some other gardens across the city. So yes, this is the first of our art and ecology talks, and I guess these talks are going to be recurring across the whole year for the next 3 years. And I guess it's a really good opportunity for this one, we thought, to think really about community gardening, and particularly post-COVID. Most people have connected to outdoor space or sort of green space or the natural world in some way, and so we felt that sort of the notion of community and how we were connecting through gardening was sort of really interesting. So just to set a little bit of context, at Grand Union, we've been really thinking about regenerative cultures, both in terms of how we think about land and also people. And I guess we're really acknowledging our social and cultural capital that we have at the gallery, and sort of in the same way that sort of we want to see how we can use that to help people who don't have those privileges. So through the way that we're working amongst sort of art and ecology, we really want to sort of create a flourishing space where people and plants can coexist in harmony and balance. We know that the world that we live in is out of balance. We know that there's unfairness, and we know that we have to sort of create more equitable sort of environments. And I guess that's where we see that art's role has a part to play within that. I think we would all agree that Birmingham, like so many other sort of post-industrial cities, has become increasingly polarised and separated by those who have lots and those who don't. And I guess that sort of here, we sort of really believe that art has an opportunity to change things, but it's only when it's embedded within communities. And that's where sort of really focusing in on communities and thinking today about the many different types of communities that we work with is sort of really important to recognise. At Grand Union, we developed a programme called the Growing Project, which is an approach to sort of working with communities, but really is looking to improve sites across Birmingham by growing food and creating green spaces. And I guess that sort of we have recognised that during the pandemic, the work that we're doing has become really crucial to many different people, but also particularly vulnerable people, but has really built up a larger and strengthened position around thinking about growing and food justice. So I guess for this talk, we wanted to really sort of enable to connect some of the knowledge and the work that's happening across the city and the strength of the many different and brilliant projects that are helping to connect people with nature. So I'm going to hand you over to Michelle and just do a very brief intro to you. So we've asked Michelle to chair the event. And interestingly, Michelle isn't in Birmingham. She's actually based in Liverpool, but she's been working from within her community for the last 20 years. And she's been a real crucial part of the Community Land Trust Granby 4 Streets, which I think she'll probably introduce you to. And has recently completed a project, the Politics of Plant, in the Winter Garden, which she's actually sat in, which I'm sure she'll introduce you to as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Michelle. Thank you so much, everybody. And there you go.
Thank you, and nice to see you all here. Good afternoon, everybody. And yes, thank you again for inviting me to be part of these ecology talks and to talk about community gardening. First thing I want to say to everybody, I love plants. I think that's one of the reasons why I've really got involved in some of these projects and the things like the Granby Community Land Trust, of which I was a board member and I'm still a volunteer. Just going to show you a quick picture of me. Here's some pictures. So this is me with the Winter Garden at one of the projects. My background is video. I do digital art. I make different creative projects and workshops in the community, and I got to get involved. So that's what I do with Granby CLT. I want to talk a bit of a small history about the community before I talk about Granby Winter Garden, because it's really important to know how it came about. So initially, Granby Winter Garden, there was a community group called That Blooming Green Triangle and the Residents Association. They were the two community groups that were key for change in our community and the impetus for why the Winter Garden exists. It kind of moved from the streets to the Winter Garden and to the alleyway, as I'll show you. But basically, the residents done a lot of planting, put a lot of planters and reclaimed the streets by getting other services back on board, and they worked alongside the Residents Association. And one of the keys to this was they brought a bit of camaraderie and a bit more vibrancy to the community and just started to bring some kind of unity in the community. So one of the things that they did, which I always loved, is that if you look at some of the streets around LA, you'll see we've got all these planters and it's very green. This is courtesy of the Blooming Green Triangle and the work that these residents done in the outside of the streets. And what basically happened is that the Residents Association morphed into the Granby Community Land Trust, and from there they still worked alongside the Blooming Green Triangle. So when the Granby Land Trust decided to regenerate and reclaim the buildings and do the houses, this particular building that you see behind me couldn't be turned into a home, but they worked with the Assemble artists who won the Turner Prize to create the Winter Garden. And basically what it is, is 2 houses knocked into one space to make a community resource. And as much as it won a Turner Prize and it gets a lot of visitors from all over, architects and everybody, it really is a kind of collective thing. So this collective of people is, I wanted to show you because they're key people from the architect at the end, assemble, Eleanor and Hazel, residents and board members, etc., coming together to make the winter garden. So let me skip to some of the winter garden imagery. It's been a slow, steady start with the winter garden, building it up. These are the artists in residence, Nina and Andrea. And literally some of the trees were donated from a herbarium courtesy of Assemble. So it's been a steady journey to get it to where it is. We've had visitors and professors like Dr. G, who was interested in the project and the politics of plants. She came from Washington University, Brown University, talking to residents and share their idea of thinking through plants and the knowledges that you can learn. So it is taking its form. Our gardener in residence, Andrea, and this is the chandelier that Nina, through a creative project, also done in Granby Winter Garden. And as it's started to take form, it's a very beautiful space that people can come and work in. You can come and just sit in and chill in. That's the night view. And the idea is that it's for people just to utilize in the community. And I love it because we do a lot of activities based in there. And the activities are always free. Yeah, that's one of the key things that we like to do with the winter garden. Free activities. So the lantern workshops, we've got gardening workshops, so we teach people how to just utilize the plants. The blue and green triangles still work and they still do all giveaways. They have meetings in the winter garden. And we do, that's one of my creative activities, looking at the Dikengas as part of the politics of plants. We work with other organizations, the Biennial, Blackfest, and generally just encourage people to use the space, whether you want to do an activity or you don't want activity, and just sit in this community resource. Another thing that we did recently, which I like about the activities, is that sometimes when you talk about the ecology, you can get people to think about different things. So we had an artist in residence called Sean, and he done a fermentation workshop. Sorry, I'm just skipping right there. A fermentation workshop. Literally, it was the first time we opened after the COVID, and people learned how to just use vegetables and the resources that they had, utilize food in a more holistic way, learn about composting, and it was just so cool. So it's a space that you can use for almost anything, apart from a rock concert or anything like. But you mentioned food, Laura. Food is key. We always provide food and refreshments, and food and refreshments in the activities that we do, because they're really important to bring this wholesomeness and homeliness. And ultimately, it is still a house. It's 2 buildings, homes. So we've got a little kitchen, what looks like a house, and a little garden space. Now, I'm rushing because I tend to want to fill it in with everything going on. But I do want to talk about what I was mentioning about the connection of the spaces from the blue and green triangle, because they're the key network running through these communities and the residents. So they started outside with the streets. We moved into the winter garden because their ideas is what came out of the design of having an indoor garden. And then we moved to what we call the alleyway. And it's not no average alleyway. It's actually, these pictures don't do it justice, but it's actually got a wow factor, much like the winter garden. So it's the street that runs behind the winter garden. It's Beaconsfield Street, and the residents there, the families included, have literally put plants literally running all the way down the alleyway, chairs, seating area. You learn how to grow, the young people get involved, and it's kept really clean, and they've all agreed to put the bin somewhere. We utilize it, the kids come out and utilize it during the projects and activities, and everyone really respects the space. And it's kind of an ethos that's been going on at, in LA, that they've kind of cultivated, which is really nice. And yeah, it does spread out. So the picture that I just skipped away from was one of my project pictures. When I said I've been involved in a few projects around LA, being with CLT, you're able to get involved in other activities, but also support other projects going on. So whilst I was able to do my project called Politics of Plants, where we made these sacred Dikengas in the community gardens in L8, and we were also able to get involved in this project, this is in the Kingsley Community Primary School, just down the road from us off Granby Street, and they had a forest school, and an artist in residence, let me find this picture, Mohamed Brussia, this is the guy on the left. He wanted to introduce Frans Fanon's ideas of health and well-being and the importance of gardens, flowers, senses, and he collaborated with the school ourselves in the biennial to create this beautiful garden. So these are some of the pictures that we were able to do. And the same way, we were able to bring some of our local gardeners involved. So you'll see Maxine and Carl, they respectively work on other spaces within the community too, on other allotments and small gardens, but we were able to get them paid positions and stuff. And just everyone's really does it, most of the work like with Granby CLT as volunteers, but the influence for me is far reaching. I think I know I've gone over, but I'm going to just wrap up. It's far reaching in the sense that around the community, you can see the effect of the work and this kind of ethos that people are building in flowers, starting in your home, flowers, food, and just this general well-being that it can foster. So what I wanted to show you was there's a new development on Lodge Lane, and even they've now incorporated this idea, you know, of utilizing the green space in a much more wholesome way. Even when we saw the planters like this, it was really like, oh, it's really good to see where it's kind of spread. People do a lot more planting in the streets and just get a lot more involved in the projects. And one of the things that I've wanted to do, which I'll leave you with this, is one of the images I used when I was doing the community gardens, and I made it a Kenga, and it was linking all three of the gardens just down in our area off Granby Street, which people weren't aware of. And it's something I would love to do in respect of our community, because there's so many different green spaces that people are using, just to make a booklet or a map to kind of create so that people can actually connect and see and become involved. And basically, yeah, that's my kind of involvement in the community gardens. So I know we're over 5 minutes and stuff like that, so thank you for bearing with me. So with that, I'll pass it on to Jenny.
Hiya, how you doing? I just need to share my screen because I'm not in my garden at the moment. As you may be able to tell, I've actually got a very nice cold at the moment, which is not COVID, as everybody seems to say straight away. Bear with me 2 seconds. Okay, so this is called A Month at Martineau Gardens because I've only been working there for a month. I'm the new CEO, and it's been an absolute delight to join the organisation at this time. Joining any organisation after COVID is an interesting point because people are starting to come back together as a community, and it's quite a frightening time for people, but it's also quite an exciting time of connection, and it's been wonderful over the last month just to see how things are starting to re-establish themselves back at Martineau. We've had a couple of events and actually seen a couple of 100 people at a time in the gardens, which felt great actually. For those of you who've not been to the gardens, Martineau Gardens is what people refer to as a hidden gem. We're directly opposite the Priory Hospital in Edgbaston, and behind that unassuming wire fence is a beautiful facade, a less beautiful facade for a very, very beautiful garden. The garden itself is, the garden project as itself is 25 years old next year. It's a registered charity. It came from what was originally Birmingham Education Department's Outdoor Education Centre, and when the council closed it, there is legend that people threatened to tie themselves to the gates and chain themselves to trees to stop them turning it into a care home. Well, I'm not sure of the truth in that, but whatever happened, they managed it. And 25 years later, we've got an amazing site. It's 2.5 acres. As I say, it's a registered charity. It's free entry for 363 days a year, or the days that we're open, for anyone who wants to come in. So we see everybody from community groups to schools to our Therapeutic Horticulture volunteers to I walked in the other morning to find a Just Eat driver sitting with his bike parked next to the bench, having 5 minutes, having his lunch, which seemed to be a perfect opportunity to break from the day. One thing when I first went to Martineau, I was absolutely blown away by is the sense of welcome. We have a special team they're called Visitor Welcome, and they are literally there to show people around the gardens and to say hello. I'm meant to make them a cup of tea, and we don't charge for the cup of tea. And the commercially minded CEO part of me went, oh no, and the other part of me went, how absolutely wonderful, because it's about inviting people into your space, into your home, into your community, not into your coffee shop for a slice of very expensive gatto and an expensive espresso. it is about creating a safe and welcoming space. Excuse me with a cough. We support people through long-term programs. So our visitors, our Therapeutic Horticulture Volunteers, can be involved in the garden for as long as they need to be. Some of those people are living with mental health issues, with acquired brain injury. Some of them have been with us for 11, 12 years. There isn't a sense of you do a 12-week program and we move you on. And that is what creates a sense of community for the whole thing. We're also lucky enough to have a qualified teacher who's involved with us throughout the summer months, providing environmental education for school children. I'm just going to have a really good cough a minute and put myself on mute, and then I'm going to come back to you. So excuse. Great, that may happen again, I can't guarantee it. One of the things where we are is we are directly on either side of the Bristol Road. So we sit on the Bristol Road on a very affluent side of the Bristol Road, and you move across the road and we're in areas where things aren't so affluent, and there are some really challenging spaces for people. Some of our volunteers come from tower blocks with 18 floors and are on the 18th floor and have no outside space. We have their gardens and woodlands. We're an organic organisation and we thrive on biodiversity and looking at sustainable ways of doing things. On occasion, that may mean we just struggle to throw things out, but actually in the main, it means that we look and reuse and recycle and those kind of things. And this is actually one of the trees that came down where we actually, our Greenwood working team have turned it into a bench in the heart of our woodland. On site, and what I love in the mornings is I get to work at about 8 o'clock, 8:30. The garden's open to the public at 10, and I go for a walk around the site to check nothing's fallen down or there's no invasions. And there's a badger that lives in the woodland that's at the back of the site, and every night they dig up little patches on the path, so I have to go and refill in the patches as I walk around. We've got squirrels, we've got a moth population which is currently being monitored by wildlife volunteers as well. We've got squirrels, we've got a resident black cat who I don't know where they live, but they pop up every now and then as well. We grow vegetables, mainly for and fruits for educational purposes, but that also goes to people on a needs, you pay what you can afford. So we've always worked on the principle that people can come and they can make a donation and they can take away fresh vegetables. And some people will pay us 20 quid for a bag, and some people will pay us, can't pay us anything, and that's fine. We're really lucky that we're one of a number of gardens, community gardens in the UK that are sponsored by Joe Malone. So they sell a candle every year, and the money that's raised from that candle goes to funding different gardens. We're the smallest of those, but that means we've had sustainable funding for our part of our work for our courtyard garden, which is absolutely beautiful, and means that we can continue to. Anyone who works in charity knows that the opportunity to have year after year funding is fantastic. We have beehives on site, we have 3 ponds, and we have a fantastic pirate play area, which has also played host to various bands. We played host to Flat Pack Festival last week, and we've had, I think the Tempest performed on our stage recently this summer as well, so it's a wonderful space for that. What we do on site, the Therapeutic Horticulture, if I explain how a day works. So the team come on site for about 10 o'clock and they'll come and they'll have a cup of tea, and it's sort of sit down and work out what they're going to do that day. We've got very experienced Therapeutic Horticulture leaders, Stuart and Jackie, who both do an amazing job. They're generally supported by a couple of volunteers as well. I will make it through the 5 minutes, but it might be quick. And they will have a cup of tea together. They'll start work on the garden. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go and do a proper cough. Bear with me a sec. Oh. Mute myself. So they will come on site, they will work for the morning, and then they will stop and have lunch. And that's one of the things we were talking just before the session started about the importance of food. And the group come together and they eat together, and everybody eats together. So that I'll pop down, the team in the office will pop down, the volunteers, and there's a sense of community that builds around that, whether it be a shared packet of biscuits or someone bringing in something to celebrate, a birthday or those sort of things as well. We're working on site once a week as well. And we run a wellbeing program at the moment, which focuses on Tai Chi and mindfulness, which is running and has been funded by Bupa. I mentioned the educational visits. You can also hire the gardens, and it's an interesting sort of juxtaposition between the gardens being a space that's a safe space for everybody and the people who come and hire it. And we work quite hard to make sure those two things balance. So we have conversations with people about things like balloons because they affect the wildlife, and just being aware of our neighbours being more than just the people who live in the houses around us. They're also the badger whose space we share and those other things. But it does provide a really useful revenue for the gardens, and it's a beautiful space. I've watched many a child running around having the most amazing pirate party. Our visitor welcome, other people I talked about who were there, they are all volunteers and from all walks of life. Some of them have come through our Therapeutic Horticulture programme, others who actually have just got an interest in gardens and Martineau. And we tend to hang on to people. Some of our volunteers have been very involved from the very, very outset. And as you'll see, we also help sell produce and plants, our own Martineau honey. We've got a beekeeper, we run beekeeping courses, but also plants throughout the year, and really looking at different ways that we can generate alternative revenues for the organisation. We've got a really small team. I'm the only full-time member of staff. There are 9 staff in total, and a community of the Therapeutic Volunteers. We call them Therapeutic Volunteers because they're volunteers. We don't want to differentiate between beneficiaries and people who come in and volunteer because they give their time, and they're a huge part of why the garden succeeded so well. We've been supported fantastically well through COVID with people coming in to water when the gardens were closed and to continue working on the gardens. It wouldn't be in the state it was in now if it wasn't for the team of people involved. And we're really lucky in terms of our trustees, that we've got an engaged group of trustees, one of whom was involved, in fact a couple of them have been involved since the very foundation of the organisation. This picture on my right is actually a miniature museum, and I love this because it's full of found objects. So we have a key to a house, and when they were digging up the ground to lay that, Stuart, who's one of our volunteers, found all these different things that belonged that were found in the garden, and they created this little miniature museum. And we posted it, only went up a couple of weeks ago, and we posted it on Facebook, and there's a little green butterfly on there. And we put a little post, and this lady came on and said, my daughter had her 3rd birthday there, and we handed out green butterflies, and we think it might be one of her butterflies. So we had the joys of telling someone years later that their butterfly was famous in the museum. And it just sums up for me the sense of Martineau having a place in people's lives. I've been there for a month, and it's been an absolute joy despite various coughs and colds, because it is such a place of welcome.
Sorry to interject there, Jenny, just to remind you about our 5 minutes.
I know, I'm done now. I can't I got a bit carried away with the last bit of cough. But yes, that's a little bit. And I'd like to say, if anyone hasn't been down and they want to come down, we're open on a Monday to Saturday from 10 to 4, and you'd be more than welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I know it's very easy, as you can see, we're very passionate about our projects and stuff like that, which is so cool. And next up is going to be Liz Rowe. So I'll pass the floor to you, Liz. Are you there?
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Michelle. I can see that I still seem to have failed to change my name to Liz. But hello, everybody who's watching. Thanks for coming to the event and stuff. Let me crack on. Goodness, I'll share my screen. Thanks, Michelle. So I'm here today talking for general public, which is me and Chris, about a project that we're calling Whole Lot of Culture. And it's something that we've been working on for a while, but very actively for the last 6 months. And it's set on allotments. It's all about allotments in Birmingham and the West Midlands, and me and Chris are kind of very passionate allotment holders ourselves. We've got a couple of our own allotments that we've had for about 3 years, and I guess in many ways we wanted to start doing that sort of, as well as doing it in our personal life, we wanted to start doing it for our work as well, essentially. So we've developed this project with various strands to it. One of the strands is supported by the Heritage Fund, and it'll explore the heritage of allotments in the West Midlands, particularly in Birmingham, from the 1960s to the present. And the aim of that is to document an alternative social history of Birmingham via its allotment culture. So it will involve making quite a significant number of oral histories with plot holders, particularly trying to capture histories from people who are perhaps underrepresented, to do with what they're growing, what they're eating, what they're building on their allotments. Because I think one of the things that I find one of the things that's really interesting in growing spaces is the sort of things that people make, be it sheds or water capture systems or things to protect their crops. So there's a lot of creativity when in growing in various ways. And that will culminate in an exhibition at the Library of Birmingham in 2023. However, perhaps more significantly, we've been working with Incredible Surplus in depth for the last 6 months. This is, I didn't realise, this is a picture of Anne Gallagher, and the pictures I'm going to show you are on an allotment site called Londonderry, which is in Smethwick, and which is in the Black Country. And the pictures I'm going to show you primarily are the work that we've been doing there for the last 6 months. Anne's looking speculatively into a large sort of cube there of some kind. Just to tell you a little bit about Incredible Surplus, they were originally established in 2014 as the Real Junk Food Project, and they intercept food and other usable materials that would otherwise go to waste from supermarkets, restaurants and other sources, and provide them to individuals and community organisations on a pay-as-you-feel basis. So they have different kind of distribution points around the city where they are giving out this food. Anybody can come along. It's not a food bank, but a lot of people who are suffering from food poverty do use their service. And they were finding, the reason they moved into allotments was because they were finding that although they're trying to give out a lot of food, they still have some left over. So you can see in this image, sort of at the back, there's like a green cylinder and with a white sort of top on it, and that's a ride-down composter, and basically you can put cooked food into it. You can put pretty much anything into it, and as long as you've got a good mix going on, you will get something resembling compost coming out the other end. So I guess it's about creating a closed loop system where you're taking waste, you're taking surplus food, you're redistributing it, but then anything that's left over, you're turning into compost, and then you're using that to grow other food. And Incredible Surplus were really keen to develop a food growing side to their organisation. They've got 2 sites, one at Dad's Lane, which is in Moseley, and this one in Smethwick as well. This site, it's a little bit more Mad Max than The Good Life, and I've kind of described the sort of creativity that you can find there. We took it on 6 months ago, and as you could probably see, a lot of work had been done on it. All the brambles and everything had been cleared, but there's still a lot of perennial weeds like couch grass, So we took it on at like April, the beginning of May, so quite late in the season. And the core objective was to immediately produce food that was grown using organic principles, to test whether people wanted fresh food, what they want, what is of interest. And so we put down lots of black plastic and cardboard and weed suppressant fabric. So we were basically making some no-dig beds, because I'm really into soil ecology as well, and trying to kind of not just think about the wildlife that is really visible, but the stuff that's under the surface, and kind of how that's really important to the ecosystem. But also I think it's really important to the nutritional value of the food as well. So you can see us starting.
Just interject a little bit. You're getting a bit choppy.
Oh, sorry, Michelle. Is it the internet connection?
It's getting a bit choppy, yeah, a little bit, but you're fine. And just the timekeeping a little as well, please.
Oh, okay. I'll try to speed up. So there's this very tangible outcome for volunteers, which is that we harvest the food every week from the 2 sites, and it's distributed through the share house in Winson Green. So it's like a very clear and kind of regular outcome for everybody involved. We're also trying to respond to kind of the different sorts of vegetables that people might want, particularly on this allotment site. It's fascinating for me because people are growing things that I've never seen before. Like our next door neighbour from One is originally from Afghanistan, and sort of when you look around his site, there's loads of things that I've never identified. This is like a bigger compost area that we built a couple of weeks ago with a group from the Prince's Trust. These are all going to be kind of our outdoor bays, and sort of working up a more comprehensive system. We give away plants as well as food. So it's not, I mean, giving away the food is a big thing, but also that enabling other people to grow stuff. So kind of, you know, lots of people want to take things to grow in their own spaces. I suppose the other thing that maybe is a factor with this is that one of the other reasons that we started using allotments with incredible surplus was trying to get land within the city. And it's really interesting hearing about the history of Martineau Gardens. We're planning on taking on some other sites, and it just means with allotments, because the food is being given away, we're not operating as a commercial operation as such, but we're able to feed quite a lot of people. I think that's about it. With myself and Chris work a couple of days a week here. The rest of the time, it's all kind of working with volunteers. Here's Chris and Mike there. This is Ezra and Margaret, who are kind of two. Incredible Surplus has very few employees, but they are two of the people who do work for the organisation, picking up some vegetables. Ezra is very photogenic. Margaret hates having her photo taken.
They look really cool.
That's it. Thanks, Michelle. That's me over.
Thank you for that, really appreciated. And with that, I'd like to pass it over on to Hannah. Hannah.
Hello everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm a little nervous. I'm just gonna let you know it will be more than 5 minutes, but you'll enjoy it, I promise. If I get to 7.5 minutes, chip in, okay? I may not look exactly at my screen just because I would like to refer to my notes because I wrote a script for everybody. So, yes, I'm Hannah from Grand Union. I am the lead on the Minerva Apothecary Garden, and I've got a few things to tell you about. So let me just check this is working. So yes, so this was Grand Union Canal side at the beginning of 2020. It didn't even look this good prior to this. But we started to make the bed then. And now through different sessions, we have gotten quite far. So we aim to work with women that are diverse. Specifically for this project, we have prioritized the session for people who are from vulnerable communities, also people from Commonwealth countries. A major part of the project is coming together to share stories through the workshops involving plants, food, and experiences. The program has been considerately developed in collaboration with participants, with our support to create an atmosphere that encourages self-care and healing. This is it now. So it's loading. Through our weekly sessions, we have been able to create this space with the group of women we have been able to work with. The garden transforms an often overlooked space to cultivate a spirit of exploration and discovery of the natural, social, and industrial heritage of the local area. We want to look at how it's interconnected and relevant to how we live today. The women from the groups that we are working with are diverse, and many are from Commonwealth countries. A major part of the project is coming together. Ooh, I'm trying to not do that, 1 second. Thank you. A major part of the project is coming together to share stories. I've already said that. We want the women to feel welcomed, not only by the staff, but with our attendees. So the participants' travel are reimbursed. Each session starts with a cup of tea and a selection of biscuits. Every session ends with us sharing a meal together. Let's talk about tea a little more. I've got a quote because I'm that person. I hope everyone's got a cup of tea nearby. I wanted to share this quote with you from Stuart Hall. It's about tea. He starts off saying, "I am the sugar at the bottom of the English cup of tea." He goes on to say, "Tea is a symbolization of English identity. What does anybody in the world know about an English person except they can't get through a day without a cup of tea?" Where does it come from? Ceylon, Sri Lanka, India? That is the outside history that is inside the history of the English. There is no English history without that other history. I share this because this project is rooted in celebrating the multifaceted cultures and diverse experiences of social history. Through this project, we hope to have frank conversations about Commonwealth to discuss the positive and negative aspects of it, and also how we can support each other. So there is much nature to be found in the city, as in the countryside. The creation of this garden has presented an opportunity for biodiversity to thrive in a post-industrial landscape, and demonstrates that this can be successfully achieved in small spaces. As you can see, everything we have planted adds to other organisms' lives. Bumblebees pollinate the flowers, butterflies visit the flowers for their nectar. The flowers we pick for the garden assist in encouraging the flowers we picked for the garden have assisted in encouraging bats into the garden, as the flowers are typically visited by moths at night, and bats like to eat moths. A little fact for everybody there. We also have berries, broccoli, and amazing courgettes. So the garden connects with the canal network in this, The garden connects with the canal network in this heritage conservation area, and will enable the groups we work with, as well as the community that inhabit Minova, to learn about how to cultivate British native flora and take responsibility for maintaining and improving this space. Key to this project is the history and legacy of the flora and fauna from the Commonwealth and its presence in the UK. We will be using the plants we tend and nurture in the garden to learn more about healing properties of plants, but also learn about how humans can use plants and herbs to heal and cure. We also learn about the historical context of plants. I'm going to give you some history, everyone stay awake, please. From the 17th century, many plants, herbs, and spices were brought from the old world and used for medicine, food, and seasoning. Many flowers and herbs are still grown in the UK today, such as calendula, lady's mantle, sage. This project aims to connect the British love of herbology with the Indigenous and diverse information from Commonwealth heritage communities. Our sessions are so varied. Some days we are sowing plants in pots, taking care of flowers and beans in the garden. Other days we learn about how plants and herbs can be utilized for beauty and for food. In this session I've just shown you, we made mint chocolate truffles, which was quite delicious. I think my favorite sessions are when we paint. Sorry, one moment. I think my favorite sessions are when we paint, whether it's watercolor or the botanical inks like you see on the screen right here. The garden will give people the opportunity and the responsibility to reconnect and protect nature in an urban setting. Manova Works is publicly accessible during the day, and so this space is open to everyone who needs a space and a respite of self-care. So if you're ever around Digbeth, please have a visit, stay a while, grab a mitten because there's loads of it, and maybe pop us a visit in the gallery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really cool. And you're well within your 7.5 minutes. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Jacob, last but not certainly least.
Well, I feel I don't live up to that presentation as I've only got about 2 slides to share. Here we go. So I'm, how do I do full screen? So I'm wearing 2 hats today. My first hat is as one of the volunteers from the Digbeth Community Garden. So we're based next door to the Warehouse Cafe, the Birmingham Friends of the Earth warehouse, which is just next to Moore Street Station. One of the things that's quite special about this place is that it's always been completely run by volunteers. There's been no funding for it whatsoever. So me and a couple of others set this up about 8 years ago. So everything that you'll see there is what we've managed to reclaim from finding them on the street, or bits you could gather like the extras from projects. And it also means throughout the years, a lot of very different things seem to happen there, depending on what volunteers are around. So one of the projects we've been running at the moment is a community hop growing project, where we grow hops for making beer in the garden, but people can sign up and we give them hop plants to grow at home in their own garden or in another community garden. And at the end of the harvest season, so this happened a couple of weeks ago, we collect and harvest everyone's hops together. We ask them to bring them to the garden and we take them to a local brewery where they're currently making our first batch of community beer, and everyone who's growing some of the hops themselves will get free beer in return for that. So that's one of the projects we've got going. One of the other things that we like to use for the space is to allow anyone within the community to use it. So this past summer, we've had several different artists doing workshops. So we had someone doing botanical ink making. We do make our own charcoal there. So we had another artist who came and did charcoal drawing workshops, and then we made some charcoal for him to take home. And again, because we're run by volunteers, it's really nice that we can just offer it for free to those artists, so they can put a ticketed charge on and they can essentially keep all that, keep any money that they make for themselves. So that's basically how we set up. A lot of the local organisations will also use it. So the cafe next door, they put on events and festivals using the space. And then we've had local bands that have come and filmed videos there. We also had a fashion shoot this summer, which is one of our first, which is quite fun. So we're sort of trying to move from just a garden to just a community space that anyone is welcome to use. We obviously also do food growing. So we've got a picture of Roberta in the middle. So she is one of our regular volunteers who's come and takes home plenty of the food that's being grown. One of the main things we grow our food for, because we're such a small space, we don't produce a lot, but what we do is something called a 10-meter meal. So this is a 3-course meal where everything has been grown and then cooked and prepared and then eaten within 10 meters of where you're sitting. So that includes stock is made of mushrooms that we've grown on the logs. The only thing we haven't quite managed to master is salt. We've been thinking about using tears or sweat or something from the garden, but I don't think it would work just about. So the other hat I'm going to be wearing today is as my role as a senior engagement officer at the Wildlife Trust for Birmingham and the Black Country. We do tons of work, so I'm not going to go into too much of it, but there's two projects in particular that will probably be of interest to people. One is that I myself deliver quite a lot of training. So we run accredited training courses for young people and adults in all sorts of different work, from green woodworking to species identification and also tools use. We're also developing training on how to actually engage people with nature, especially young people. So I think I've got a session on the 15th of October that may have some spaces left. But that's, if anyone's working with young people and isn't quite confident in taking them to nature reserves or parks and thinking about the risks and dangers involved, or what activities they can do, or even how to identify certain trees, bushes, flowers, then you're welcome to join these sort of training courses. The main project that I wanted to speak about was our growing local flora. So this is where we grow native wildflowers, particularly woodland and wetland flowers that don't spread as easily, in particularly woodland flowers that you'll find in ancient woodlands. They have very heavy seed heads and they actually tend to spread by crawling. So that's how we know they're indicative of an ancient woodland, is the fact that they're there, or maybe we've planted them, but we've got records that will show that. So what we do is in our environmental education session centres, where we have one in Winton Green and one in Small Heath, we've created nurseries where we grow these species, and we have lots of volunteers who can take cuttings, they do propagation, and then eventually they'll go out to create new green corridors or enhance current parks. So the photo on the left is at one of our centres. I think there's some opposite leaf golden saxifrage in the front bed, which is a really nice wetland species, and then behind some yellow archangel. So they're being potted up, and after a few months of letting their roots develop and growing a bit bigger, and we know they're going well, then they can go into some of our enhancement. So on the right bottom corner is some work where we've done some restoration work along the River Cole, regrading some of the banks, and then some of the plants that we've grown in our nursery were then being planted right there by volunteers into the riverbank, which is going to be massively helpful for any invertebrates and small mammals along those banks. So we're starting to encourage other gardens to do similar. So in the Digbeth community garden, I have a whole range of woodland species now growing that are indicative of an ancient woodland, but it's definitely not an ancient woodland in Digbeth. But you can see the benefit for the wildlife, and it has a very different flowering calendar compared to most of the normal things you have for food growing. So it's been really interesting seeing what different species have been emerging because of that as well. So that's probably just about it for me. Only 2 short slides, but if anyone has any more questions.
When are you guys open?
Oh, in the Digbeth garden is open at the moment just on the 1st and 3rd Saturdays of each month. Again, because we have no staff, it's all volunteers. That's our general opening hours, but if people are interested in putting on their own events, then sometimes it's open for all sorts of other things. So it's best to just look out on our social media.
Thank you so much, Jacob, and everybody else for all these presentations. The work that everyone's involved in looks so good. You're still here with me, everybody? Okay, yeah, I forgot I saw the silences and the nods. Yeah, so what we're going to do now is move to some question and answers. I've had a quick look in the chat, and there's a general question in the chat. And what I generally spoke to the ladies about was, I just threw up some ideas around ecology, problems, participation, education. You don't have to talk about them specifically, but anything you want to share. But we can go to the first question, which is going out to everybody, and it comes from Matt Gale, and he's asked to everybody, what sort of challenges did you face in securing your sites, and what advice do you have for anyone embarking on ecology projects? And that was open to the floor. Anybody want to jump in?
I was going to say, Michelle, just direct it to somebody if nobody.
Okay. Oh, ho, 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 ho.
I'm happy to jump in on this one.
Come on, thank you, Joseph. Appreciate it.
So we, for the Digbeth garden, for example, I wouldn't say we're not secure at all. It's always an ongoing battle where you're negotiating with councils or landowners to take on. But there's a lot of like rules and laws that you can like have on your side, and there's you can tend to negotiate what we call like peppercorn agreements with councils and landowners. One of my favorite sayings is it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission as well. So if you're starting anything, don't be afraid to just stick in there, and it's a lot harder for them to get rid of you.
Well, I have to add to that, Joseph, that was a comment that Hazel, one of the founding ladies of the Granby CLT and the other groups I mentioned, that was a direct quote that she likes to always throw up, you know, about asking forgiveness, about literally approaching some things, because when they literally were doing the benches and stuff and putting street furniture, you didn't ask for any permissions, you just done it, and then you do what you do after the back. Would anybody else like to respond?
I was just going to really quickly jump in. I guess for anybody that's based in Birmingham at the moment, there's a conversation, a WhatsApp group that's connecting all of the Birmingham growing community, and they meet on a monthly basis. And part of one of that line of inquiry is that they're sort of formulating a sort of more in-depth discussion with the City Council. So if there's anybody who's interested in sort of getting involved with that, if they contact me, I can sort of connect you.
Yeah. So, oh, that's really my paper. Thank you very much for that, Joe. And yeah, I would add some general ideas. And was there anyone willing to speak about any particular things? You know, some of the issues that they might have been facing, sustainability, the future, participation. You know, make me point the finger. Okay, what's that from Heather? Well, I wanted to mention things about the winter garden in respect of, you know, sustainability. One of the things and one of the projects that I mentioned earlier on, you know, the resilience garden, you know, the pictures of the resilience garden, what I showed you are really, really gorgeous. But one of the flaws of that particular project, like so many of them, is that they lack the sustainability. So the resilience garden is somewhat overgrown. It didn't have the mechanisms in place with the school to maintain it, you know, so sometimes when these projects come, if it hasn't got a sustainable angle, then it's kind of difficult to continue it. With the winter garden, what I haven't been able to show you, which I'd like to when you get here or do a little tour, we've tried to incorporate it for ourselves by looking at having an Airbnb built into the project. So as much as the ground floor is actually workshop space, which you can hire out and utilize, but also give free, much like Jacob mentioned, we've also incorporated Airbnb into the space so that we can generate an income and make the whole building self-sustainable. We're not quite there yet, but it's something that we're kind of wanting to lead to for the future. I see you, Jenny. Anything you want to add?
I think one of the things that, I mean, for Martineau, we're lucky that we've got a history, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee us the future, if that makes sense. I think that the spaces that, I mean, we work in Prime Site and Calthorpe Estates. So there's a combination of things about the long-term future of sites, I think, which is a challenge, depending on where you are, but also about the diversity of income sources. I was interested that Jacob, the community gardener, doesn't take any money from anywhere. And one of the things that I've found with going into supporting with Martineau is the number of different routes that we get cash from, and the ways in which we have to do it. I think that for community spaces, there's a real recognition at the moment of the impact of mental health following COVID, and people re-engaging in community spaces and green spaces, which means there's funding available. But there's also, I'd say, ways of increasing your own income streams to, I suppose, give you more sustainability as well. I think it's any charity now, or any organisation that's looking to do it, you kind of can look within your own community to ask as well. I think that's quite an important thing, that people bring their own strengths, their own gifts. I had a wonderful expression. There's a guy called Julian Abel, who writes about compassionate communities, and he does a great podcast. And he talks about not maps of misery, but treasure maps. And I love that in community space, that you look for where the strengths of people are and what you can bring from there. And I think it's just obvious that although Martineau is based on a more funded model, that with what's happening in Digbeth, there's some amazing things that happen just because people care enough to go and look and reclaim and those kind of things as well. So that's my perspective.
Oh, that's very nice, appreciated. Anna, would you like to share some things about sustainability with your project?
Okay, wasn't expecting you to ask me, but I should have been prepared.
After that as well, so.
I think our project, so Minerva Works, is like one of 6-7 gardens right now, in the wider context of the Growing Project, which is run by Grand Union. And I think that lends itself to having like a sustainable ecosystem anyways. We can pick plants from our nursery at St. Anne's to plant here alongside. St. Anne's for some reason has the best growing site. They got big vegetables, and these are things that we have utilized. We have our artist chef who works with Grand Union, has known Grand Union for a very long time. So what's really beautiful is that they have this community ethos, and they go around the other sites and utilize what we've got to make food with the people that's there. And I think also, like, knowing that we're working with communities that are vulnerable, some of our garden sites are in hostels, where people have come out of prison or have very unsafe situations, and for them to find like safety in food and growing in alongside the independence of that, I think is this beautiful dichotomy of having that independence to do what you need to do, but also knowing that you can share and you can create a wider system. So if we plant some chamomile that we've got in St. Anne's and it grows amazing here, and then we have tea later, there's absolutely no problem in that. I think what was good now that we're all here and we've all connected is that we can figure out how us as an organization, each one here in Birmingham, in Liverpool, can support each other and create more connections. So it was really lovely to see your question, Matthew, and to see that you want to keep that going. I know once you message Jo, it'll go well because she's amazing.
And thank you very much for that, Anna. And Jacob, the same to you. Anything you want to share around sustainability?
Yeah, so like sustainability as completely volunteer led for Digbeth, sustainability is always a bit of an issue because there is always a risk that suddenly every volunteer has moved away and there hasn't been any new ones coming in. So that's why it's been very important to try and to constantly have a community around us. A big part of us is having the local businesses or cooperatives next to us, such as the cafe, that they've also got some ownership. So we lean on them quite a lot for them doing events, or them bringing their own community in. So it's always by making the most of what's around you, to be constantly bringing people in. In terms of the actual ecology of the sustainability, I also think it's quite important to be thinking about thinking about how much manpower you have in the sense of what you plant and how you look after a garden. Because I do a lot of garden and wildlife area creation in schools, and 4 community groups in my job. And what I often find is like a small bunch of raised beds or a small garden being attempted to be built in an area that's not quite got the community ready to look after those beds. And food growing, as a lot of you will know, gets very, very difficult well, difficult, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. So it can very quickly spiral out of control and then become even harder to look after. So I very much encourage people to think about how much, like by going for wildflower patches or thinking of like the native woodland flora or fruit trees, something a bit easier to manage until you're fully ready to have this community involvement. So there's also that side of things to make it easier to manage for you.
Thank you, Jacob. I really feel I can really resonate with that, because that's one of the issues that we're always overcoming with the volunteering system and having core staff. We've got a couple of questions. This first question comes from Alice, excuse me, Oldfield, to everybody, I guess who's in Birmingham. Any advice or pockets of funding, stroke support people know about in Brum would be really helpful if anyone can point to any. Very open question, realise. That was from Jenni, I saw you flash.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, 2 things, one of which is BVSC is great in terms of funding pots, of publicising funding pots that are available. The other thing is you may have come across is neighbourhood network schemes. So these are local authority funded schemes for the social work teams, which are about addressing need generally in the over 55. So it's quite targeted in that, but they are extending it to adults and people with additional adults with additional needs. And they look for locally funded projects in a very locally based area. And there's a neighbourhood network team in each area, and they can fund up to 10 grand without having to go to councillors to do that. So if you've got a project which is about bringing people together and social inclusion and reducing isolation and those kind of things, it can be really useful to have a conversation with them. They also do a really good asset mapping piece. I hate the phrase asset mapping. I hate referring to people as assets. I think it's horrible. But they've got local directories of all the services that are in your area. And actually, if you're trying to encourage participation, which I noticed was the next question, there can be quite a useful referral network as well. So I'd recommend picking up with your local NNS.
Thank you so much for that. And as you led into, a question came from Laura asking.
Sorry to interrupt, Michelle. I just wanted Jenni to repeat
Apologies.
the acronym in the beginning. What was the
neighbourhood network scheme?
Okay.
So and there's a lady called Benita who's involved from BVSC, who's very, very enthusiastic and very, very good at contacting and networking with people if people want to get involved with that. And it's not specific to charities, it's third sector organisations, community groups across the board that they're looking for. They also run things like safeguarding courses and governance and all that sort of stuff for those that need it. So useful resource to tap into. You do get referrals back the other way. You get quite a few people through if there's something they're interested in. So worth a conversation.
Thank you, appreciate it. And yes, as you mentioned earlier, we were just going to go and mention some things about participation. It was Laura who wanted to know and was interested to know more about how we've all encouraged participation in our garden spaces. Would anyone like to start off? I can't see everybody. Jacob, as we haven't heard from you, or Liz, would you like to speak to start that off?
Who would you like, Michelle?
Well, I would like Liz, I think, if that's okay, and then Jacob, if that's all right.
Yeah, it's always difficult with participants. I think, like a lot of people that I've had coming to volunteer on the project, often they'll come for just a very short amount of time, so it's quite hard to get, and then you maybe have a smaller core team. So in terms of what you can ask them to do, and then also a lot of people want to come along to relax and enjoy the space, and as kind of people have hinted at, there's always a lot of work to be done to kind of maintain spaces. Everything's growing everything's gardening all the time, and people want to chat and socialize and have a drink and things like this. So I think it's just like a constant ongoing job, quite a really significant job to kind of keep people coming in and maintaining people, and then also trying to like skill them up to do things for you as well. So there's lots of different elements. I always think street level posters are really good. Really think that's good, and maybe having special sessions where you can introduce volunteers, where you have an open day where you can get a few people along in one go to kind of introduce them to a space and stuff. And
no, definitely.
Can I just add one thing to the street level posters? If you've got a Nextdoor app in your area as well, it's a really useful platform to put things on. Now, literally, you've got to be in the community to be able to post on it, but they're like slightly protected social media pages that you sit on the app, and actually are really good for the things like people giving away free stuff, or if you need things. And my background's PR on comms historically. I'd encourage people to use social media to get engagement. As someone within your community will be adept at Instagram, and can build it really help you build it really well, if you want to use it as a platform to publicise engagement.
Thank you, appreciate it, Jenny. I'm mindful of time because I know we're pushing towards the roundup, but I did want to introduce the question of anything we'd like to share about the future and the future going forward. So I can start. What is the future for us going forward with our projects? Much like you've all identified, for me, one of the key things is with Winter Garden is to continue what we're doing to make the building as accessible as we can and just make it as much wholesome. But like also, we're really seeking to have core staff alongside the volunteers, because some of the pitfalls that we've explained and some of the difficulties we have having a regular volunteer core that can keep evolving can be difficult. So we're looking to help build on our sustainability by having core staff, you know, and just continue these networks that we have and we're rebuilding and building and forging, and hope for me that we can have some exchanges with yourselves and other people's. So that's what I see for my future. So I'd like to pass it on to Jacob to talk about your future.
Yeah, it's a big question. Don't know what I'm doing tomorrow yet. For the Digbeth Garden, like the future, we just basically want to have the future protected for us. So by having a nice big pool of volunteers with lots of people putting on different events and really feeling involved and taking ownership, and then working with lots of groups themselves. I think we've had discussions with Joe from Grand Union before about them potentially bringing groups, and that's what we want it to basically be, that space that anyone in the area can come to or use as they wish, to a certain extent, not like having a rave in there or something, but you know what I mean. For the Wildlife Trust, we are just looking to continuously enhance the area for wildlife, and one of the big movements we'll be making is towards training in the local area. So keep an eye out, because that's what we're trying to move to, is to enable others, like people on this course, to have more knowledge or more confidence or more expertise on wildlife and on nature. So we want to be able to spread those skills to everyone, so do keep an eye out for anything that comes up with us.
Thank you for that, Jacob. Anna, would you like to share some of your thoughts about the future?
How did you know I wanted to share my thoughts about the future? I guess the future of the Growing Project seems to be very blissful because of the foundation that's been made. And I think maybe just continuing to do that. I think you can't think about the future until you sort out what's happening presently. So just ensuring that we have these connections, that Alice in the chat is connected to us, and to keep the spirit of growing and gardening alive. but I thought I've taken some great advice from the Nextdoor app. Thank you for that, Jenny. And Liz, the street level posters, we don't have any posters. So I definitely think I've been planning an open day for the volunteers so we can get some as well, Jacob. And I definitely think I'm going to start utilizing posters, because as much as we're using social media, we still need to reach the community that's local. So I think for the future, in my opinion, Jay could tell me if I'm wrong, we're going to do a lot more engagement of just making the public know that this space is here. Because I feel like even myself, Jacob, you're around the corner. I've not seen you. Where are you? So just maybe that would be good. I think I'm also throwing it out that we do a nice a community walk to the different garden sites, since you're only in Edgbaston. But yeah, the future is bright. The future is green.
I like that. And most definitely, I second that. Anna, sorry, Liz, would you like to share some thoughts of the future?
Yeah, unmute myself. Goodness, it's a big question, isn't it? There's just so much to do. I don't know where to start. I mean, we're hoping to take on another allotment site in the autumn, and like it's a good time because we can start getting it ready for next season and have a bit of a longer run in. And just kind of, yeah, just trying to get a bit better at everything, really. Thinking, you know, what do we want to grow next year? What food are people interested in? What plants are people interested in? How can we make really good quality compost? What are the magic ingredients? We're waiting on a funding bid for a project called Compost Culture, which will be about like spreading the word about making compost to people. But yeah, just trying to carry on really, and kind of just increase our capacity in terms of how many people we're working with and how much food and how many plants we can give out, and kind of get people into it as much, spread the word as much as possible really, and hopefully meet up with the people I've met here today some more as well. So
definitely. I don't care if I'm in Liverpool, I'm still coming down to Birmingham to link with you all. And Jenny, Jenny, would you like to share some thoughts about the future?
I think mirroring a lot of people, what a lot of people have said is thinking about the sort of how we're going to continue to grow, and no pun intended, but also reach people. I think like lots of organisations, we're very good at talking to people that we already know. And actually, how do you engage with groups of people who, I hate the term, are harder to reach? You just have to work a bit harder to get to them. And that's really important to me. I think there's huge numbers of people that can benefit from green space that maybe don't feel safe in some of the bigger spaces. We've got a big challenge in the next 12 months because we've got to replace one of our buildings as part of our lease term. So I'm thinking green sustainability, green heating. Anyone who's got any experience of that, I'm more than happy to have a chat with, because my knowledge is about that big at the moment. And I suppose for me, one of the things that I know nothing about gardening, and I'm quite honest about that, but I do believe in sharing experience and education and people swapping and trying out different roles. And so, you know, if people want to come for almost like a day's work experience at Martineau and see how we do things, we're more than happy to accommodate people and those kind of things to see how we do it. I'm not saying how we do it is perfect. I'm sure it's just the opportunity for exchange. And I think what we were talking about at the very, very beginning of the call was how you share practical, and it's so experiential. What I loved about gardening is the fact that it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from or what information you have or what qualifications you've got, it's what you know about that plant at that time. And there's something about that universal coming together. So yeah, I'd love to see more building events like this. It'd be fab.
Most definitely. And you know, for me, I feel as being like, you know, how you talk about how the roots of a tree when they're all growing together, and if there's a weaker one underneath that they actually sustain the other one underneath through the roots. That's how I kind of feel about these networks and how we connect as organizations and respective people doing the projects that we're doing, you know. So I think, yeah, the future is very bright and is very green, Anna. And with that, I'll pass you back to Joe and Laura for any thoughts that you have.
Hey, we're just doing a final check of if there was any questions that sort of that were urgent, but I guess if anybody does have anything specific, we're quite happy to sort of follow that up and pass that on to any of the panelists. I just want to sort of thank everybody. I want to thank Michelle, to Jenny, to Hannah, to Jacob and to Liz, just for their presentation and their generosity in terms of how they've talked about the work that they're doing. It's such amazing sort of examples of sort of how people are really developing strong relationships with the natural world. I think sort of just to sum up really in terms of what we've sort of encountered in this little hour and a half out of the rain, that there feels a real strength in how we're creating these networks and how we're building those connections, both within our own gardens with the people that we're working with, but also here, and how those connections are really important. Everybody's frozen. I don't know if that, have I frozen?
No.
No, you're fine.
Listening with
and I guess that sort of that just thinking a bit more about how we can learn and share a bit more and exchange a bit more from each other, because that will help us to build that more cooperative and also sustainable practices. And sort of just to end, like sort of that feels like, you know, such a strengthened position in terms of the fight against capitalism, because we're all in that together, and like sort of that is what's really going to change our times. But I think what we're all doing here is making sort of those gentle but very valuable steps towards it. So with that, like we're actually finishing an event early, like on time, 4 minutes early, but have a beautiful day. Laura's going to say something.
I was just going to say thank you to everybody who's also kind of contributed kind of tips and kind of links in the chat as well. What I'll do is I'll gather them up and then email that around to everybody who has been participating. So just in case you're worried you didn't catch some things, I'll gather them up and send them around along with a survey, a Grand Union survey, which I have to try and gather from people, but yeah. Keep a lookout for that.
Yeah, and sort of this is the first of sort of further talks to come, so please do sort of stay connected, and we'll inform you of anything else that's coming up. But yeah, thank you. Great.
And before we leave though, I would just like to thank you both for inviting us, because honestly, the more projects and the more initiatives that I see around the country, like you were talking about the shared practice, and it just lifts us all, and it actually just revitalizes everything. Even with the drive, even as a volunteer, you can feel a bit jaded and stuff, but when you see what's going on, and then the idea is to help bolster where we're at as well, and hopefully whatever we can share with people, it's a very real thing, you know, that we're doing. So thank you all for helping rebuild this connection and branching out, and every last green plant pun we could use them, because they're all valid.
Thank you so much. If the panelists can just stay on, but if we can say bye to everybody else and hopefully see you soon.